The Arizona sun bore down with a merciless glare, turning the desert floor into a shimmering sea of heat. Dust devils twisted across the open plains, chasing tumbleweeds like restless spirits, and the distant mountains rose jagged and unyielding, as if carved by the hands of giants. It was a land both unforgiving and breathtaking, a place where every man who stayed long enough was tested, not only by the land itself, but by the silence it demanded. For John Carrington, a rancher of 35, the silence had become louder than any storm. He was a man shaped by the frontier, broad-shouldered, sun-darkened, with calloused hands that had built his ranch from nothing. The Carrington spread was no small patch of dirt. His cattle roamed hundreds of acres, his barns stood sturdy against the wind, and his wealth was whispered about by ranch hands in nearby saloons. But wealth meant little when the nights were as hollow as the desert wind. Every morning, John rose before the first light, tightening the saddle straps on his horse as dawn cracked the horizon. He rode his land faithfully, inspecting fences, counting cattle, and scanning for any signs of rustlers or Apache raiding parties. The frontier was not a place of safety. It was a line drawn between survival and ruin. Yet even with all his responsibilities, what weighed heaviest on him was not the threat of loss, but the emptiness of a life lived alone. Neighbors in town spoke of him as a man who had everything a rancher could want. But John knew otherwise. He had no wife waiting at the porch, no child's laughter echoing against the barn walls. The house he had built with strong beams and polished floors remained cold, its grand fireplace never warmed by the glow of family. At times, when the moon hung full over the desert, he would lean against the wooden rail of his porch and feel the ache of solitude so sharp it seemed carved into his very bones. The truth was, John had always been a dreamer, a strange thing for a man of his kind. Most ranchers thought only of profit, cattle drives, and staying alive. But John had visions that went deeper. He dreamed of a woman, not just any woman, but someone strong, proud, and unafraid of the land. In the stillness of night, he imagined her dark eyes holding secrets older than the desert itself, her spirit unbroken by hardship, her presence filling the silence that haunted him. He could not explain why, but in his dreams she often appeared unlike the women of town, with their lace parasols and practiced smiles. Instead, he dreamed of someone wild, someone who belonged to the earth as much as the cactus and the hawk. Perhaps it was foolishness. Perhaps it was loneliness twisting into fantasy. Yet the dream never left him. It clung to him in the creak of the windmill, in the hush of dawn, in the cry of coyotes on the ridges. It whispered that somewhere out there, across the harsh lands and the old hatreds of men, lived the woman he was meant to find. Still, dreams did little against reality. Reality was that tensions with the Apache were rising once more. Ranchers whispered about raids, stolen horses, and bloody reprisals. Soldiers from the nearest fort rode often through the valley, their faces hard, their rifles gleaming in the sun. To them, the Apache were not people but shadows on the land, something to be pushed back, fenced out, and erased. John had never taken to such talk, though he knew better than to speak against it too loudly. He respected the Apache, even feared them in a way, for he saw in them the same pride and resilience that the desert itself carried. And yet, despite the warnings, despite the tensions simmering like coals in dry brush, John could not shake the pull that tugged him toward the mountains and canyons that marked Apache land. At times, when his duties were done, he would ride further than he should have, skirting the border where his ranch land gave way to theirs. It was not just caution that led him there. Something deeper urged him, something he couldn't put into words. On one such evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, John reined his horse near the ridge overlooking the river valley. The air was thick with the smell of sage and dust, and the sound of water tumbling over rocks echoed faintly below. He sat there longer than he intended, gazing toward the distant canyons. He did not know why his chest tightened, why he felt as though the desert itself was holding its breath. The dream of her came again that night. More vivid than ever, a woman stood tall against the firelight, her long dark hair catching the glow, her eyes fierce yet filled with a sorrow he longed to soothe. She was both stranger and destiny, as though the land itself had shaped her for him. And when he awoke, heart pounding, the whisper of the dream lingered. Find her. John Carrington was no fool. He knew the desert gave nothing freely, yet as he saddled his horse the next morning, he could not deny the truth stirring inside him. The land might test his body, the ranch might test his strength, but his own heart was now the greatest challenge of all. And somewhere, beyond the ridges and rivers, in the very world his neighbors warned him against, waited the beginning of a story that would change everything. The desert had its own way of deciding when to grant a man's wishes, and it rarely did so gently. It was late afternoon when John Carrington first saw her. He had ridden farther than usual that day, pushing his horse across dry creek beds and over ridges where the mesquite trees clawed at the sky like gnarled fingers. The sun was dipping low, bleeding orange and violet across the wide horizon, and the first cool breath of evening whispered over the land. He had been checking for strays from his herd, yet something deeper, something unnamed, pulled him into country most ranchers dared not cross. The trail narrowed into a rocky cut, where boulders leaned close as if hiding secrets from the world. That's when his horse snorted, ears flicking forward. John's hand instinctively dropped to the worn grip of his Colt revolver. In these lands, a man never knew whether a sound meant a mountain lion, a rustler, or worse. Then he saw her. She was not like the women of his imagination, no fleeting shadow of a dream this time, but a living, breathing figure standing tall at the edge of the rocks. Her frame was striking, taller than many men, and her presence filled the narrow pass with an unspoken command. Her long black hair spilled down her shoulders in waves, catching the last light of the sun. Her skin was bronzed by the desert, her posture proud, and her eyes, dark, steady, and unyielding, fixed on him with a mixture of defiance and pain. It was only then that John noticed the blood. Her arm bore a deep gash, the kind that looked fresh and angry, staining the fringes of her deerskin dress. She clutched a crude wrap of cloth against it, but the effort did little to stop the steady seep of red. For a moment, time seemed to halt. The only sound was the restless shuffle of his horse and the low call of a hawk circling above. John knew instantly what she was: Apache. Her features, her bearing, her very stance proclaimed it. And in this land, that knowledge alone could mean life or death. Her gaze flickered to the revolver at his side, then back to his face. Her chin lifted slightly, as though daring him to raise it, to do what so many white men before him had done to her people. Yet in that instant, John felt no threat, only a strange pull, an ache in his chest that echoed the dreams that had haunted him for months. Slowly, deliberately, he loosened his hand from the Colt and raised both palms toward her, in peace. "I mean you no harm," he said, his voice low, carrying in the still air. She did not answer, her lips pressed into a thin line, her breath shallow from the pain of her wound. Still, she did not step back. If anything, her eyes burned hotter, as though weighing his soul and finding it uncertain. John slid down from his horse, boots crunching against gravel. Every movement he made was careful, measured, for he knew a startled Apache, wounded or not, could be as deadly as a coiled rattlesnake. He took a cautious step forward. "You're hurt," he said gently. "Let me help." Her, Expression hardened, and for a fleeting second, he thought she might reach for the knife at her hip. But then her knees buckled, just slightly, betraying her weakness. Pride held her upright, but blood loss had its own will. John's instincts overpowered hesitation. He moved closer, pulling a clean kerchief from his pocket. She tensed, a flash of fire in her eyes, but when her strength faltered again, she allowed him near. Kneeling beside her, John pressed the cloth firmly against the wound, his hands steady despite the thundering of his heart. Up close, he could see the fine lines of her face, strength carved into beauty, beauty carved into strength. She did not flinch, though her jaw tightened with the sting of pressure. "What happened?" he asked softly. "For a long while," she said. "Nothing." The silence stretched between them, thick with mistrust. Finally, in a voice low and husky, she spoke a single word in broken English. "Soldiers." John's chest tightened. He didn't need details. He had heard the stories, had seen the aftermath of clashes between the cavalry and Apache bands. To her, he was kin to those very men, the ones who brought blood and fire into her world. Yet she let him tend her. That alone spoke louder than words. When he finished binding the wound as best he could, he stepped back, giving her space. The woman straightened, proud once more, as though determined not to show weakness before him. Her eyes lingered on him, still, guarded, still unreadable. "You'll not make it far on foot," John said quietly. He gestured to his horse, who stamped impatiently at the rocky ground. "Come with me, just to the ranch. I'll see you safe until you're strong again." The ride back to the Carrington Ranch was a long one, stretched by silence and the unspoken weight between the two of them. John had offered his horse, steady and sure-footed, while he walked beside, holding the reins loosely. She rode tall despite, her wound, her chin high, her dark eyes scanning every ridge and canyon as though expecting an ambush at any moment. The desert deepened into night as they traveled, the sky spilling over with stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Coyotes sang in the distance, their mournful cries drifting across the plains. John caught himself glancing up at her more than once, at the way the starlight traced her features, at the quiet strength in her posture, at the silence that seemed both shield and weapon. She had not offered her name, and he did not press her for it. A man who lived in Apache country knew better than to demand what was not given freely. Still, curiosity gnawed at him. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen, fierce yet wounded, untamed yet vulnerable. And though reason told him this was a dangerous road, his heart felt as if he had been walking toward her all his life. By the time they reached the ranch, the lamps in the bunkhouse windows were still glowing faintly. The cowhands would be finishing their evening talk before turning in, their voices carrying low and rough across the yard. John led her past quietly, guiding her toward the main house. He could already imagine the questions in their eyes if they saw who he had brought. Questions that would carry the weight of suspicion, maybe even anger. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar wood and tobacco. The parlor was neat but bare, its polished table and leather chairs seeming too large for one man's use. John struck a match, lighting the oil lamp on the mantel, and the golden glow softened the hard edges of the room. Gesturing toward a chair, he spoke carefully. "Sit. You need rest. I'll get water and bandages." She did not sit. She stood, tall near the doorway, her hand brushing the handle of the knife at her waist, her eyes narrowing at every shadow as though the walls themselves might betray her. John paused, realizing the truth. To her, this was no sanctuary, but a prison she had just stepped into. She was alone, injured, surrounded by the home of a man she should have seen as an enemy. Her wariness was not misplaced. "I won't harm you," John said quietly. "No one here will. You have my word." At last she moved toward the chair, lowering herself with deliberate grace. Her expression remained unreadable, though John thought he glimpsed a flicker of exhaustion behind her stoic mask. He brought her water in a tin cup. She accepted it, sipping carefully, her gaze never leaving him. As he knelt to check the wound, she finally spoke again, her voice low, edged with steel. "Why help me?" John looked up, meeting her dark, unflinching eyes. "Because it's right," he said simply. "A wounded soul deserves a hand, not a bullet." For a long while, she studied him as though trying to pierce the truth from his words. Then, without answering, she leaned back in the chair, letting her eyes drift shut for the first time since he'd found her. The next morning, the storm came. It began with whispers in the bunkhouse. The ranch hands had seen her silhouette through the window. By breakfast, the whispers turned to questions, and by midday, questions became accusations. "Boss, what's she doing here?" one of them demanded. He was a wiry man named Cole, his face weathered from years on the trail. "That's Apache blood sitting in your house. You know what folks'll say? You know what they've done to us?" John's jaw tightened. He met their stares evenly. "She's hurt. She stays here until she's healed. That's the end of it," the men muttered, exchanging uneasy glances. Loyalty to John was strong, but fear ran deeper. They knew the stories of raids, of settlers ambushed, of cattle stolen and burned. To them, the woman inside his house was not just a stranger, but a spark near dry grass, and they feared the fire she might bring down upon them. That night, John sat by the hearth watching her sleep on the settee, her wound bound with fresh bandages. In the flickering light, her face seemed softer, almost peaceful. He thought of the way the men had looked at him earlier, suspicious, doubting, resentful. Bringing her here had already set him at odds with the people who worked his land, and it could set him against the entire town before long. Yet as he leaned back in his chair, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, John knew the truth. Whatever storms were coming, he would face them. For the first time in years, the silence of his house was broken, not by fear or anger, but by the presence of someone who carried the same unyielding spirit as the land itself. And though neither of them knew it yet, this uneasy beginning was the first step toward a bond that would challenge everything they thought they knew about loyalty, love, and survival. The days that followed were a test of patience, trust, and pride. The Apache woman, still nameless to him, stayed within the ranch house, recovering slowly. Her wound was deep but clean, and with proper care it began to mend. Each morning, John brought her food, cornbread, beans, dried beef, and each morning she accepted it without thanks, her gaze steady and unreadable. She ate little, as though wary that every bite might carry some hidden trick. John didn't mind the silence. In truth, he welcomed it. He had long grown used to the hush of empty rooms, the solitude of wide-open ranges, yet her silence was different. It wasn't emptiness, but defiance, a wall built stone by stone to keep him on the outside. On the third day, as he replaced the dressing on her arm, she finally spoke more than a word. Her English was broken, but her tone was clear and firm. "You, white man, why here? This house, this land, not yours, belong to no man." John paused, the clean cloth in his hands. Her words struck sharper than he expected, though he had heard such accusations whispered before. He met her gaze evenly. "I worked this land with my own hands, built the fences, dug the wells, raised the cattle. That's how it became mine." Her dark eyes burned. "No, you steal. All white men steal. You take from earth, from river, from people." John's chest tightened. He could not deny that what she said was true, at least in part. He had seen it with his own eyes, soldiers driving her people from valleys where their ancestors had hunted, ranchers fencing off water holes that had once belonged to everyone. Still, the defensive words slipped out before he could stop them. I never stole from anyone. I carved my living from what was here. I took nothing that wasn't earned. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She said no more, but the look she gave him carried the weight of centuries, resentment forged by generations of broken promises and blood spilled on desert soil. That night, John couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch, a pipe between his fingers, staring out over the moonlit plains. Her words echoed inside him, pulling apart the threads of his certainty. The land he called his. Was it truly his, or just borrowed, fenced by law and muscle? He had always thought of himself as different from the others, a man who respected the Apache, who wanted no war. But was that enough? Or was he only another piece of the same machine grinding her people into the dust? The following morning, trouble found them. Two of his hands, Cole and Ramirez, rode up to the porch, their faces tight with suspicion. Cole spat in the dirt before speaking. "Boss, word's getting out. Folks in town heard you got an Apache woman here. Already saying you're harboring trouble. You know how quick that'll turn bad." John stood, his jaw firm. "She's no trouble. She's hurt. And she'll stay until she's well. That's all there is to it." Cole's eyes narrowed. "That's not all. You know how the cavalry thinks. They catch wind of this, they'll come knocking. And when they do, they won't be polite. You're risking all of us for a squaw." The word cut like a blade. John's temper flared. And before he could think, his fist shot out, cracking against Cole's jaw. The man staggered, cursing, blood on his lip. The yard went still, the other hands watching in stunned silence. "She's under my roof," John said, his voice low and dangerous. "And while she's here, she'll be treated with respect. Any man who can't abide that can ride out today." "No," one answered. Cole wiped his mouth, glaring, but he said nothing more. The men drifted back to their work, tension thick as smoke in the air. Inside, the woman had seen everything from the window. When John returned, she looked at him differently. Not softer, not trusting, but curious. As he lit the lamp, she asked in her halting English, "Why fight your own men? For me?" John shrugged, though his voice carried the truth. "Because no one deserves to be treated like less than human. Not you. Not anyone." For the first time, a flicker of something shifted in her expression. Not quite trust, but not disdain either. She studied him a moment longer, then gave the faintest nod, as if acknowledging a piece of his spirit she hadn't seen before. Still, the divide between them was vast. He was a rancher, a man of fences and contracts, tied to the world of townsfolk and law. She was Apache, born to a people who lived with the land, not against it, shaped by traditions older than any paper deed. Their worlds were not just apart, they were enemies by design. Yet in that uneasy space between defiance and respect, something fragile began to form. And though neither of them would admit it aloud, both knew that fragile thing would soon be tested by forces far larger than themselves. The ranch settled into uneasy rhythm. Days passed, marked by the rising and setting of the relentless sun, by the clatter of hooves and the low calls of cattle across the plains. The woman's wound began to heal under John's steady care, though she still held herself apart. Her strength returned with each passing day, and soon she no longer lingered in the chair or the bed, but moved freely through the house, quiet as a shadow. At first she spoke little, offering only curt nods or single words when John asked simple questions. But silence has its own language, and John began to learn it. He saw the way her eyes lingered on the flames in the hearth, as though fire carried stories he could not hear. He noticed how she always turned her face toward the east when dawn came, whispering something soft in her own tongue, words he could not understand but sensed were prayer. He respected that silence, never breaking it with questions. One evening, the desert gave them a gift. The air was cool, touched by the scent of rain carried from some far-off storm. John had built a small fire in the yard, a habit from his younger days when he liked to sit outside and let the night keep him company. She came quietly, standing at first in the shadows, then stepping closer, drawn by the flicker of flames. They sat without speaking, the firelight painting their faces in shades of amber and gold. Above them, the stars spread wide and endless, more brilliant than in any city. For a long time, there was only the crackle of wood and the call of an owl from the distant ridges. Finally, John spoke. "My father brought me here when I was a boy," he said slowly, his gaze fixed on the fire. "We had nothing then, just a wagon, a few tools, and a dream. We worked the land until it gave something back. Hard years. Lost him to fever before. The ranch was half what it is now." She turned her head slightly, watching him. Her expression was still guarded, but there was no mockery, no anger, just listening. Encouraged, John continued. "I suppose that's why I stayed. Built this place in his memory. Some nights, though, I wonder if I built it for nothing. Big house, wide land, but no one to share it with." For the first time since she arrived, her voice came without sharpness. "Lonely," she said, the word thick but clear. John's chest tightened. He looked at her, and though her gaze was steady as ever, he thought he saw something softer beneath, something that mirrored the emptiness inside himself. Yes, he admitted. Lonely. Another silence followed, but this one felt different. Less like a wall, more like a bridge waiting to be crossed. In the nights that followed, small bonds began to form, unspoken yet undeniable. She began teaching him words in her tongue, short phrases, simple sounds. He stumbled over them, his accent clumsy, but when he managed to pronounce one correctly, she almost smiled. Almost. In return, John told her the names of stars, the stories. Settlers gave them, though he suspected her people had their own tales for the same shining lights. Sometimes he would catch her humming softly in her language. Melodies that seemed to rise from the desert itself, carrying echoes of ancient roots. The ranch hands watched with wary eyes. They kept their distance, uneasy but bound by John's command. Whispers still traveled, drifting like dust on the wind, but John paid them no mind. His focus was on her, the mysterious woman who had walked straight out of his dreams and into his life. One night, as they sat again by the fire, John found himself asking what he had long held back. "Your name. Will you tell me?" She studied. Him in silence, the flames dancing in her dark eyes. Finally, she spoke a single word, Nayeli. He repeated it softly, tasting the sound. It was like the desert wind, sharp yet beautiful, carrying weight beyond its letters. She gave a small nod, acknowledging his effort, and for the first time, a faint smile touched her lips, brief as starlight but enough to strike him like lightning. From that night on, the silence between them was no longer emptiness. It was presence, a quiet companionship that spoke louder than words. John knew he was treading dangerous ground. The world outside his ranch would never understand, would never forgive. But here, under the vast sky, by the fire's glow, the line between their worlds blurred. And as he watched Nayeli's face in the flickering light, John realized that the dream he had carried for so long was no longer a phantom of lonely nights. It was here, beside him, alive and breathing. Silent bonds had begun to weave them together, fragile as spider's silk, yet strong enough to hold against the winds of the desert. The peace of those quiet nights could not last forever. The desert was patient, but men were not. It began with whispers, the kind that carried faster than wildfire through dry brush. Word had reached town that John Carrington was sheltering an Apache woman under his roof. By the time John rode in, for supplies, eyes followed him from the boardwalks, lips tightened and mutters filled the saloon air. "Carrington's lost his damn senses," one man grumbled loudly as John passed, bringing in a squaw. "That's like inviting a wolf into your sheep pen," another spat. John ignored them, his jaw set, but the words burned. He had never cared much for the town's gossip, but this was different. He could feel the weight of judgment pressing harder each day, and he knew it was only a matter of time before someone acted on it. Back at the ranch, the unease was sharper. His men still obeyed, but their respect was fraying. Cole, his wiry foreman, muttered openly now, his eyes dark with resentment. Ramirez kept his silence but moved stiffly, avoiding Nayeli whenever she crossed the yard. John caught two others whispering about leaving, their gear already half-packed. Nayeli saw it too. Though she said little, John noticed the way her gaze sharpened when she stepped outside, the way her hand lingered near her knife whenever ranch hands drew too close. She was no fool. She had lived too long in a world where trust was a dangerous luxury. One evening as they sat by the fire, John told her what he had heard in town. "They don't understand," he said, shaking his head. "They see only what they've been taught to fear. To them, you'll always be enemy." Nayeli's face was calm, but her voice was edged with steel. "Your people hate mine. My people hate yours. It has always been so. Why do you think you change it?" John stared into the flames, feeling the truth of her words press against him like the desert heat. "Because hate doesn't have to be forever," he said finally. "Someone has to start breaking it." She did not reply, but the flicker of firelight in her eyes suggested she was turning the thought over, weighing its worth. The next blow came from the Apache side. 2 days later, smoke rose on the horizon, signal smoke. Nayeli saw it first, her expression tightening. She spoke quickly in her tongue, words John couldn't understand, then turned to him with a grim look. "My people know I am here." The meaning struck him hard. If they believed she was being held against her will, they might come for her, and for him. That night, as the stars burned bright overhead, John found himself restless, pacing the porch. Nayeli stood nearby, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the distant ridges. Finally, she broke the silence. "They will come, not tonight but soon. They will ask why I stay. Some will say I betray them." Her voice carried no fear, only certainty. But John felt his stomach knot. He was caught between two fires, settlers who saw her as a threat and Apaches who might see him as her captor. "Either way, the danger was closing in. Then let me ride out with you," he said suddenly. "Let me speak with them." Her eyes snapped to his, sharp as a hawk's. "You think they will listen? You think they will not cut you down where you stand?" He met her gaze without flinching. "If it keeps them from harm, if it keeps you safe, I'll take that risk." For the first time, she seemed unsettled, as though his willingness to sacrifice surprised her more than any threat could. She looked away, her voice quieter. "You are foolish, brave, but foolish." The following morning brought another reminder of the storm gathering. Soldiers rode through the valley, blue coats flashing in the sun, their rifles gleaming. They stopped briefly at the ranch, asking questions in clipped tones. Had John seen signs of raiding parties? Had he spotted Apache camps nearby? John gave careful answers, keeping his face steady, but inside, his heart pounded. If they learned Nayeli was under his roof, there would be no explaining, no reasoning, only blood. After they left, John returned to the house, finding her near the window, watching the soldiers ride off in a plume of dust. When he entered, she spoke without turning. "You cannot keep both worlds. One will break you." Her words chilled him. She was right. His choice to shelter her had already set him at odds with his men, with the town, and now with the army. And soon, her people would force a reckoning as well. Yet when she turned to face him, her dark eyes fierce and unwavering, John felt the same conviction he had felt the night he first whispered his dream into the desert air. Whatever storm was coming, he would not turn her away. The bonds between them had been silent, fragile, but they had grown strong enough to hold against the voices of fear and hate. Still, deep down, John knew. The true test of those bonds had not yet arrived. The breaking point came sooner than John expected. It began with a raid on a neighboring ranch. At dawn, smoke curled over the horizon, and by mid-morning, riders brought word. Cattle stolen, barns torched, 2 men dead. The town erupted with fury. Blame fell squarely on the Apache, though no one had proof beyond tracks in the sand and the anger in their own hearts. By evening, soldiers from the fort gathered in the saloon, rallying settlers and ranchers alike. A posse would ride at first light, they declared, to strike back before savages struck again. John listened from the corner, silent, his hand clenched around his glass. He knew too well what such vengeance meant. Whether guilty or not, Apache families, women, children, the elderly, would pay the price. That night, the ranch was restless. His men spoke in low voices, their eyes hard. Cole confronted him openly. "You heard what happened, Carrington. They'll come for all of us if we don't put a stop to it. And yet here you are, keeping one of them under your roof. Whose side are you on?" John's voice was steady but cold. "I'm on the side of what's right. I won't let them spill blood for revenge." Cole spat in the dirt. "That woman's bewitched you. You'd betray your own kind for her." The words cut. Not because they were true, but because John knew many others believed them. His authority, once unquestioned, now stood on shaky ground. Inside the house, Nayeli sensed the storm brewing. She watched him pace the room, shoulders taut, jaw set like stone. When she spoke, her words were quiet but sharp. "You cannot stop them. Your people will ride. Mine will fight. Blood will spill. You cannot hold it back." John stopped, his eyes burning. "Then tell me what to do. Sit by while men kill each other? Watch as soldiers march against your people, and your people strike back until there's nothing left but graves?" "No, I won't." For the first time since she had come into his home, Nayeli's mask cracked. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with something deeper. "My brother. He leads our warriors. If soldiers come, he will fight. He will not stop. To him, you are enemy as much as they are." John's chest tightened. The thought of facing her brother on the battlefield, of raising his gun against her kin, twisted something inside him. "Then come with me," he said quickly. "Let me speak with him. Maybe he'll listen to you. Maybe he'll listen to both of us." She shook her head, her dark hair falling like a curtain around her face. "He listens only to the spirits of our fathers, not to me, not to you." The silence between them stretched, heavy and suffocating. At last, John sank into the chair, his voice rough. "Then what am I supposed to do, Nayeli? Stand by while they kill each other? Stand by while they kill you?" Her eyes softened just slightly. She moved closer, close enough that he could see the faint scar along her jaw, the shadows of exhaustion beneath her eyes. She laid her hand lightly on his arm, a rare gesture that carried the weight of everything unspoken. "You must choose," she whispered. "Your people or me." The words struck like a blade. All his life, John had lived by loyalty, to his father's memory, to his ranch, to the men who rode for him, to the settlers who called him neighbor. But now, faced with her, with the bond that had grown between them, those loyalties wavered. Before he could answer, the decision came crashing to his door. Near midnight, hoofbeats thundered in the yard. Soldiers. Their fists pounded on his door, voices sharp with command. "Carrington, open up! We've orders to search! Word is you're harboring Apache!" John's blood turned cold. He glanced at Nayeli. Her hand tightened on the knife at her belt, her eyes flashing like a trapped hawk's. He moved quickly, pushing her toward the back room. "Stay quiet," he hissed. "Don't move until I say." She stopped him with a look, fierce and unyielding. "They will kill you for me." John's voice was low, steady as iron. "Then let them try. I won't hand you over." The pounding grew louder, the door trembling under their fists. In that moment, John Carrington's loyalty was no longer divided. He had chosen, not the safety of his ranch, not the approval of his neighbors, not even the bond of blood with his own kind. He had chosen her. The night air was thick with the pounding of fists on wood, the harsh bark of soldiers demanding entry. John Carrington stood between the door and the woman he had sworn to protect, his body taut like a drawn bow, every second stretched long, every heartbeat echoing like a drum of war. "Carrington!" the sergeant's voice thundered. "We've orders from Fort Wilcox. Step aside and let us search. You harbor one of them, and you'll swing for treason." John's hand hovered near his revolver. He had faced rustlers, wolves, and drought, but never this, never the threat of his own people turning against him. With steady breath, he pulled the latch and swung the door open. 4 soldiers stood there, rifles gleaming in the moonlight, faces hard with suspicion. Their leader, a broad-shouldered sergeant with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward. "You've been seen keeping company with an Apache woman," he said flatly. "We'll have her now." John's voice was calm, but it carried iron. "There's no one here but me, and you've no right to tear through my home like bandits." The sergeant's lip curled. "We'll decide that." He shoved past him, motioning for his men to enter. Inside, boots scraped against wood as they searched the rooms. John's pulse hammered. In the back chamber, Nayeli crouched in the shadows, her hand on her knife, her breath silent as the desert wind. A soldier pushed open the door to her hiding place. His lantern light swept across the room, halting on her crouched form. For one suspended moment, neither moved. Then the soldier's mouth opened to shout. He never finished. Nayeli sprang forward, a shadow of lightning, her knife flashing. The soldier collapsed with a strangled cry, lanterns smashing to the floor, oil spilling into flame. The ranch house roared alive with fire. Chaos erupted. Shouts filled the air, gunfire cracking through the night. John drew his revolver and fired, dropping a soldier who had raised his rifle at Nayeli. Smoke curled upward, the timbers creaking as flames devoured dry wood. "Outside!" John shouted, grabbing her wrist. Together they burst through the doorway into the yard. Horses screamed in panic. Men roused from their bunks rushed out, half-dressed, their faces lit by firelight. Cole, the foreman, took one look at the soldiers bleeding in the dirt, then at Nayeli at John's side, and his face twisted with rage. "Damn you, Carrington!" he bellowed. "You've doomed us all." Before John could reply, the sergeant staggered from the house, blood staining his sleeve, his eyes blazing with hate. "Seize them!" he roared. "They're traitors both!" But hesitation flickered among the ranch hands. Some stepped back, unwilling to raise arms against the man who had led them for years. Others looked ready to follow Cole, their loyalty torn between master and fear. Then the fire chose for them. With a groan, the roof of the house collapsed inward, sparks shooting skyward like falling stars. Flames leapt to the barn, catching the dry hay, igniting the night in an inferno. John pulled Nayeli toward the corral, his voice harsh with urgency. "We ride now!" She mounted swift and sure, moving like she had been born to the saddle. John swung onto his stallion, and together they spurred into the darkness, bullets snapping past them, shouts echoing into the night. Behind them, Carrington Ranch burned, the work of a lifetime consumed in fire and ash. For miles they rode, not daring to slow, until at last they reached a dry arroyo hidden among the rocks. Breathless, their horses lathered, they dismounted. The fire's glow was a faint smear on the horizon now, but its memory seared John's heart. He stood in silence, chest heaving, staring at the woman beside him. His home was gone, his men scattered, his name branded as traitor. All that remained was her, the choice he had made, now written in smoke and blood. Nayeli looked at him, her face unreadable, though her eyes burned with something fierce. Not pity, not sorrow. Something sharper, something alive. "You gave up your world," she said softly. "For me." John swallowed hard. "I didn't give it up. They took it. But I'd do it again." For a long moment the desert was silent, but for the whisper of the wind. Then Nayeli nodded once, slow and solemn, as though accepting not just his sacrifice, but the bond forged in it. Yet deep down, both of them knew this was not the end. The army would hunt them. Her people might not accept him. And between two worlds of fire, they now stood alone, but together. The desert at dawn was a place of silence, where the first light brushed the mesas with gold, and the cool air trembled with the promise of heat to come. John and Nayeli rode through that silence, their horses weary, their bodies sore from a night of flight. Behind them lay Carrington Ranch, reduced to smoke and memory. Ahead lay uncertainty. Her people. Nayeli guided them with unerring instinct, leading through dry riverbeds and across stony ridges, always watchful, always listening for the faintest sign of pursuit. John followed, his mind a storm. He had lost everything but her. And now he rode toward the very people most settlers feared, not knowing if they would greet him with arrows or mercy. By midday, they reached a hidden canyon where cottonwoods lined a stream. The air was cooler there, alive with the trickle of water. But it was not empty. From the rocks above, figures appeared, tall, fierce, painted for war. Apache warriors, bows drawn, rifles glinting in the light. Nayeli dismounted slowly, raising her hand. "I am Nayeli," she called in her native tongue, "daughter of Chief Kanya. I have returned." The warriors lowered their weapons slightly, murmurs rippling among them. One of them called back sharply, "And the white man? Why does he—" "Ride with you?" John's heart pounded. He felt the weight of a dozen arrows aimed at his chest, the heat of suspicion in their dark eyes. "He saved me," Nayeli answered firmly. "He chose me when his people turned against him. He has left his world behind." The warriors muttered again, doubtful, hostile. One spat on the ground. Another sneered. "He will betray us. They always do." Then a commanding voice broke through the tension. An older warrior strode forward, broad-shouldered and scarred, his presence cutting through the murmurs like a blade. His eyes fixed on Nayeli first, softening briefly, then turned like steel upon John. "Why is he here?" the man demanded. Nayeli's voice trembled slightly for the first time. "Because he is with me, brother." The revelation struck John like a hammer. This man, the leader, the warrior whose shadow she had spoken of, was her brother, the one she said would never listen. The warrior's jaw tightened. "You bring him to our camp? A white rancher whose people kill ours? You shame our fathers, spirit." John dismounted, his boots crunching on gravel. He met the man's gaze without flinching, though the weight of it was heavy. "I don't come as an enemy," he said, his voice low but steady. "I've lost my land, my men, everything I built, all because I chose to protect your sister. I stand with her now, whatever that means." The warriors hissed among themselves, but Nayeli's brother said nothing, only studied him with the eyes of a hawk. Then he turned sharply. "Follow if you dare. But know this, one wrong step, and you will not leave this canyon alive." They were led deeper into the camp, past women grinding corn, children playing in the dust, elders watching with solemn eyes. The air was thick with suspicion, every gaze fixed on John like a blade at his throat. He felt more a trespasser than he ever had in enemy territory. At the center of the camp, the council fire burned. There, the elders gathered, and Chief Kanaya, Nayeli's father, emerged from his lodge. His hair was long and white as desert sage, his face a map of years, but his bearing was regal, commanding. Nayeli bowed her head before him. "Father, I have returned." The chief's eyes softened, pride flickering, but when they shifted to John, they hardened like stone. "Why do you bring this man here?" he asked in Apache. Nayeli's reply was simple, but heavy with truth. "Because I love him." The camp fell silent. Even John understood the words without translation, for the tone carried the weight of fire and water, of choice and fate. The chief's gaze lingered on John, unreadable. Then he raised his hand. "This cannot be decided by words. The spirits demand proof. If he is to stay, if he is to stand beside my daughter, he must face the trial of the desert." The words rolled through the camp like thunder. Warriors nodded grimly, elders murmured, and Nayeli's face paled. She knew what it meant. John did not. But he understood enough. It was a test, and failure meant death. That night, as the fire crackled and drums began their low, haunting beat, Nayeli stole to his side. Her voice was tight with fear. "They will not let you be. They will make you prove yourself. And if you fail, they will kill you. My father, my brother. They will not show mercy." John took her hand, rough against, delicate, his thumb brushing over her fingers. His eyes, though tired, held no wavering. "Then I'll survive. Not for me, for you." In the glow of the fire, with two worlds poised to crush them, their bond was no longer just whispered words. It was a vow forged in the desert itself. Tomorrow, he would face the trial. The desert dawn was cruel in its beauty. The rising sun painted, the mesas in crimson fire, and the dry wind whispered across the sands like 1,000 voices. John Carrington stood at the edge of the camp, stripped of his hat, his gun, and every comfort of his former life. Only his will remained. Before him, Chief Kanaya stood tall, flanked by elders and warriors, their eyes solemn. Beside the chief was Nayeli, her face shadowed with fear, her hands clenched so tightly the knuckles whitened. She had pleaded through the night, begged her father to relent. But the chief had not wavered. "If he is to claim a place beside you," the chief said, his voice carrying like thunder across the canyon, "he must face the trial of the desert. Let the spirits decide if he is worthy." The warriors brought forth what would be his burden, a heavy water gourd sealed tight. The rules were simple, though brutal. He must cross the dry arroyo and return by sundown, surviving the scorching heat with only the gourd to sustain him. Alone. John met Nayeli's gaze once. She mouthed words only he could see. "Come back to me." Then he set off. The sun climbed quickly, and with it, the heat pressed down like a hammer. The desert was a vast sea of stone and sand, shimmering with mirages. John's boots scuffed against the earth, every step harder than the last. He thought of the ranch he had lost, of the fire devouring his life's work. But most of all, he thought of her, waiting with eyes that demanded he return. Hours stretched like years. His throat burned, lips cracked, every breath dry as dust. Twice he almost stumbled, twice he almost fell to his knees. The gourd sloshed with promise, but he forced himself to ration, knowing that thirst was the enemy more deadly than any bullet. By midday, the horizon rippled with false rivers, tempting him with illusions. He saw the ranch as it once was, whole and alive, men riding in laughter, the barn full of hay. He saw his mother's face, long gone to the grave, calling him home. He shook his head, forcing the visions away. Only one truth anchored him: Nayeli. But the desert was not content to test only his endurance. From behind a ridge came the rattle of stones and the unmistakable hiss of a rattlesnake. Its coils shimmered, its fangs bared. John froze, sweat dripping, into his eyes. He could have turned aside, but the path was narrow. The snake coiled where he must pass. With slow breath, he lifted a rock. His arm trembled from exhaustion, but his aim was steady. The stone flew, striking the snake just behind the head. It writhed, striking blindly, then fell still. John stepped past, heart pounding, every nerve alive with the reminder the desert had no mercy. By late afternoon, his strength waned. His boots dragged furrows in the sand. He drank the last of the water, the gourd now hollow. His vision blurred. But through the haze he saw it, the smoke of the Apache camp rising against the sky. With a hoarse cry, he forced his legs onward, stumbling down the arroyo. Warriors watched from the canyon rim, murmurs spreading as he staggered closer, dust-caked and sunburned, but still moving. At last, as the sun kissed the horizon, John collapsed across the fire circle, the empty gourd clattering to the ground. His chest heaved, his skin blistered, but he was alive. A hush fell. Chief Kania stepped forward, his face carved from stone. He studied the broken rancher, this outsider who had walked the edge of death and returned. Slowly, he raised his hand. "The spirits have spoken," the chief declared. "He has endured. He has proven his will. From this day forward, he is no longer enemy, but kin." The camp erupted in cheers, though some faces still held doubt. Nayeli ran to John's side, kneeling. Beside him, cradling his head in her lap, tears streaked her face, falling onto his parched skin. "You came back," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. John's cracked lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "I told you. I'd survive. For you." Her hand pressed against his chest, feeling the battered but unbroken heart that beat there. In that moment, the firelight, the drums, the gathered eyes, all of it faded. There was only them, bound not by chance, but by choice, by trial, by sacrifice. That night, beneath the stars, the Apache sang songs of endurance, of trials past, and spirits honored. John sat by the fire, still weak, but alive. Nayeli sat beside him, her hand never leaving his. For the first time, John understood what it meant to belong not to land, not to wealth, not to the approval of others, but to love, and to the people who honored it. The rancher who had once whispered of dreams to an Apache beauty now lived that dream, hard won, carved in fire and desert stone. And though the world beyond the canyon still seethed with war and hatred, here, in this place between two worlds, their love endured forever.